engage with the ecosystem. Do not try to just understand through interview and then go back and figure it out yourself. Keep the process of engagement open throughout the entire iteration of innovation. Now, that's a concept. You can apply it anywhere. You can do it to build a product, you can do it to solve a problem, you can do it to run a company. I mean, there's many ways to engage consistently. What the Open Innovation Lab concept that we're planning on implementing, that we're beginning to implement here, is about is it is not the only way to do innovation, but it is a tool that allows us to address an area that is hard to do innovation in. And it basically works as follows. There is a theory that says there are many customer problems that no one can solve yet. There is no suitable solution, there is no professional service, there is no answer to the problem. And the theory goes as follows. The customer still knows there's a problem. The customer may not know what the answer is, but they know that the ecosystem in the industry has failed to solve these problems successfully. They might have an insufficient solution or no solution, but there's still a gap. Now, there are two ways to address that. One, you could go recognize the gap, and then you can go back to your labs and try to figure it out. Or the other is, because the customer probably has the best insight about recognizing when you get it right, that maybe it's better to do the development process of trying to figure out what the solution is supposed to look like in conjunction with that customer in the customer environment. Now, this does not work for every type of innovation. That's why we have many different vehicles to do innovation. But it does work very well when you're talking about a customer problem that is generally a gap as opposed to a complete gaping hole in the industry. And what we find is immediately we realize that there are two approaches to how you might tackle this. One is try to build a conventional product for them, but the other lesson we learned is customers have short attention cycles. They have full-time jobs. They are busy. And so one of the other principles of OIL is that you don't really focus on building the end product. You focus on building a prototype of sufficient representative value so that the customer can point at it and say, that's what it's supposed to look like. They're not saying that's the product, they're saying that's a prototype that could solve this problem that seems sufficient that it meets their expectations. And then from that, we now have a reference architecture that looks like what the product's supposed to be, but isn't the product, that we can then take back to the company and say, we need to build one of these for real. But the trick is to be able to do that process with the customer, in the customer premise, using very, very rapid development processes, any tool at your disposal, whether it be open source or existing products or just hacking things together. But the purpose is to get to a point where both you and the customer look at this thing you've created, this Frankenstein in some cases, and say, that's right, that would solve the problem. Because until you know what the answer is supposed to look like, there is no point in building a product because you may or may not get it right. And so it de-risks the product development process. By the way, the example that we talked about around the VMAX 10K and the characteristics in China were a approach to open innovation. I don't think they moved fast enough and they weren't as efficient as this model, but there was a dialogue about what is the characteristic of a high-end storage array in China.
When you say fast enough, what's the time period we're talking about for testing the value?
It depends, but typically, my experience has been when we run oil projects, we're talking weeks or months, not quarters and years. I mean, if you have to spend 6 months to a year building an oil prototype, you're wasting your time. I mean, that's too long because the customer doesn't have the time to wait. And it also means that you're over-engineering it because, again, you're not trying to build the finished product. You're trying to build something that looks like the finished product, that has the characteristics of the finished product, but ultimately is just a reference that can then be used to create a more rigorous approach to building a real product to solve the problem.
So I'm sure you guys are